The city of New York, 1776. This is not a battlefield. It is the nerve center of the British war effort in America, a fortified island bristling with troops, ships, and officers of the crown. For the American cause, it is an impenetrable fortress, a black hole from which no information escapes. But on Water Street, there is a tailor, an Irishman named Hercules Mulligan. His emporium is one of the most respected in the city, the destination for any British officer of rank and means. They come to him for the precise cut of a new uniform, for repairs on their formal wear, and for the companionship of a talkative Irishman. Mulligan was, in fact, an early and fervent supporter of the Patriot cause. He was an enigmatic figure, a man who had to live his life in reverse, appearing to be a friend to the British while secretly working for their downfall. His profession was not just a cover, it was his primary weapon. Espionage is often imagined as a dangerous game of infiltration, of slipping into enemy territory. For Hercules Mulligan, the enemy came directly to him, day after day. He did not need to break into their headquarters. They brought their secrets into his shop and trusted him with them. His method was a masterful study in human nature. He catered to the vanity of the high-ranking officers who frequented his emporium. While taking their measurements, he would engage in conversation, stroking their egos to elicit statements of speculation. He learned to listen to the cadence of the army. He would ask a simple, professional question. When will you be needing this uniform returned? If one officer needed a repair by Tuesday, it meant nothing. But if, over the course of a week, dozens of officers from different regiments all gave the same urgent date, Mulligan could deduce with near certainty the day of a planned military movement. He could gauge the scale of an operation by the sheer volume of orders and the timing of their pickups. But Mulligan was not a lone operative. The intelligence he gathered was useless if it remained within the city walls. The second, and perhaps most perilous part of the operation was handled by Cato, an enslaved man who worked with Mulligan in his shop. Cato served as the courier. It was his job to slip past the British patrols, exit the city, and make the dangerous journey to General George Washington's headquarters with the vital information. The risks he undertook were severe. On at least one occasion, Cato was captured by the British on a return trip, where he was questioned and beaten before managing to get back to New York. Together, this two-man cell represented one of Washington's most valuable assets, and twice they would save the general's life. The first instance came late one evening. A British officer, flustered and excited, arrived at Mulligan's shop long after hours. He needed his coat immediately. Mulligan, ever the accommodating tailor, complied while inquiring about the reason for such a rush at such a late hour. The officer, eager to boast, all too readily responded. He was departing on a top-secret mission to capture General Washington himself. The British had received intelligence pinpointing a location where Washington was scheduled to be, and they were planning an ambush. The moment the officer was out the door, Mulligan dispatched Cato into the night. Cato navigated the route to headquarters, delivering the warning just in time. The American commander changed his plans, avoided the trap, and the British ambush found its target empty. The war continued, its course just altered by a tailor and his associate, operating in plain sight. For years, Mulligan's contributions would remain one of the war's deepest secrets, his name an enigma to the very public he was fighting to save. But while secret agents operated in the city, a different kind of fire was being stoked in the backcountry. The year is 1780. The war for independence is going badly for the Americans. In the North, the conflict has settled into a stalemate. In the South, it is a catastrophe. Charleston, the largest city in the South, has fallen to the British. A major American army has been defeated at Camden. Confident of victory, British General Charles Lord Cornwallis prepares to march north through the Carolinas, believing he can crush the last remnants of resistance. To secure his western flank and to rally Loyalist support, Cornwallis dispatches one of his most brilliant and ruthless officers, Major Patrick Ferguson. Ferguson's target is the rugged frontier, the remote settlements west of the Appalachian Mountains. The people who live here are known as the Overmountain Men. They are not soldiers. They are a race of hardy men, stout, active, patient under privation, and brave. They are hunters, woodsmen, and pioneers, hardened by years of skirmishes. They are also, crucially, originally reluctant to pick up arms for the Patriot cause. The war is a distant affair, a conflict on the seaboard that has little to do with their crude homes on the frontier. Major Ferguson sees these settlements not as a people, but as a threat to be neutralized. He intends to cow them into submission. On or around September 10, 1780, he makes a fatal miscalculation. He paroles a captured rebel named Samuel Phillips, a kinsman of one of the frontier leaders, Isaac Shelby. He sends Phillips over the mountains with a verbal message for the settlers. It is not a request, it is a brash ultimatum. The threat is deadly in intent and import. If the frontiersmen do not desist from their opposition to the British arms, Ferguson warns, he would march over the mountain, hang their leaders, and lay their country waste with fire and sword. Ferguson's threat was meant to intimidate. Instead, it outraged the settlers. It unleashed a hornet's nest of contempt and hatred. Ferguson had transformed an abstract war of ideals into an immediate, personal threat against their homes and families. He had given these reluctant pioneers a singular, unifying purpose. They grabbed their rifles not to fight for a new nation, but to hunt down the man who had threatened to burn their farms. The call goes out. Militia units from all over the region, from Virginia, North Carolina, and what is now Tennessee, are called to muster at Sycamore Shoals, an outpost on the Watauga River. They are led by men like Isaac Shelby, John Sevier, and William Campbell. This is no regular army. They are all volunteers, unpaid, each man arriving with his own horse and his own hunting rifle. From Sycamore Shoals, nearly 1,000 rifle-armed mounted militiamen ride out in pursuit of Ferguson. The march is immediately grueling. They ride for 20 miles, climbing to the top of Yellow Mountain, which, even in late September, is already snow-covered. They follow a crude path known as Bright's Trace, pushing along the North Toe River. That evening, they make camp at Grassy Creek. They are cold, wet, and exhausted. Over their campfires, they prepare a simple meal of parched corn and finish the last of their beef rations. They are now deep in the wilderness, with no supply line, their food gone. They are a volunteer army of hunters, driven by pure rage, disappearing into the snow-covered mountains, stalking their prey. But while these frontiersmen were marching to meet their destiny, the man who would become the most famous name of the war was already a celebrated hero. Before the name Benedict Arnold became a synonym for traitor, it was synonymous with hero. Born in Norwich, Connecticut in 1741, Arnold was not a soldier by trade. He was a man of intense, restless ambition, forged in the world of business. After his parents passed, he moved to New Haven and, with his sister, opened a small store as a pharmacist and bookseller. He quickly proved to be a brilliant and daring merchant. He became one of the most successful merchants of the coast, owning a fleet of ships that conducted trade from the Caribbean to Canada. This background is essential to understanding the man. He was proud, accustomed to command, and keenly aware of his own financial standing. His initial opposition to the British was not just philosophical, it was practical. British tax policies like the Stamp Act and Sugar Act severely curtailed mercantile trade in the colonies, directly threatening his livelihood and fortune. When the war began at Lexington and Concord in 1775, Arnold, then a captain in the Connecticut militia, marched his company to Cambridge. He did not wait for orders, he proposed them. He went to the Massachusetts Committee of Safety with a secret mission of his own design, a daring offensive strike to capture Fort Ticonderoga in New York. He knew the fort was strategically vital, lightly defended, and held a massive cache of artillery that the new American army desperately needed. Impressed, the committee granted him a colonel's commission and authorized the mission. But Arnold's ambition quickly met its first rival. Along the route, he encountered Ethan Allen and his Green Mountain Boys, who, it turned out, were on the exact same mission. A heated contest and much argument over command immediately erupted. The proud, newly commissioned colonel and the boisterous frontier leader clashed. They eventually agreed to a shared command and, on May 10, 1775, surprised the small British garrison, capturing the fort in a stunning victory, the first major offensive action of the war. This triumph, however, established a bitter pattern. Arnold felt forced from command of the fort he had captured, and in the popular narrative, Allen's name would be the one primarily credited. Despite this, Arnold's reputation for boldness reached General Washington. Washington tasked him with one of the most arduous campaigns of the war, leading one of 2 columns in an invasion of Canada with the goal of capturing Quebec City and adding a 14th colony. The expedition was a logistical nightmare, hastily planned and poorly supplied. Arnold was to lead 100 men through 300 miles of what was believed to be 180 miles of uncharted Maine wilderness. The flat-bottomed boats they were given were hastily constructed and proved to be a fantasy for the journey. They began to leak almost immediately, ruining the gunpowder and spoiling the preserved meat. The men were almost constantly wet, forced to wade in frigid, waist-deep water, pulling the 400-pound boats upstream. They portaged their heavy supplies over a 13-mile stretch of rough, roadless woods, sinking up to their knees in mossy bogs. Then a freak, off-course Caribbean hurricane struck the column. The Dead River rose 8 feet in 9 hours, flooding the camp and sweeping away the precious boats and supplies. One of Arnold's subordinates, Colonel Enos, and his division of 450 men, deserted and turned back, taking with them most of the remaining provisions. The remaining men were starving, reduced to eating candles and boiling their leather cartridge boxes. By the time this phantom army reached the walls of Quebec, they were exhausted. In the final, desperate assault on the city during a blizzard, the invasion failed. Arnold was shot and severely wounded in the leg. Though the campaign was a nearly complete failure, Arnold was considered by most to have served valiantly as a brilliant tactician and hero. For his sacrifice, he was promoted to brigadier general. His name was forged in heroic suffering. Arnold had sacrificed his health and his personal fortune for the cause, and he would do so again. But his sacrifices were about to be met with professional insults. Before Benedict Arnold's climactic moment at Saratoga, he performed one of the most critical and least known strategic services of the war. In 1776, the British planned a massive invasion from Canada, sailing south on Lake Champlain to seize the Hudson River Valley and cut New England off from the other colonies. The Americans had no navy to stop them. Arnold, with his pre-war experience managing his own merchant ships, was given the assignment of overseeing construction of the American fleet at Skenesborough. Working with superhuman speed, he built a small makeshift fleet from scratch. On October 11, 1776, at the Battle of Valcour Island, Arnold's green-timbered fleet met the vastly superior British Royal Navy. The outcome was a tactical rout. Arnold was defeated after a day of fierce fighting, and most of his ships were captured or burned. But this defeat was, in fact, a brilliant strategic victory. Arnold's ferocious defense of the lake, though it cost him his fleet, delayed the British advance. By the time the British had cleared the lake, the season was too late. Winter settling in, the British were forced to abandon their invasion of the Hudson Valley for the year. Benedict Arnold had bought the Continental Army 12 precious months. Despite this, Arnold's proud, abrasive, and difficult nature created powerful enemies. He feuded constantly with other officers. One rival, John Brown, was so vicious as to publish a handbill that claimed, Money is this man's god, and to get enough of it he would sacrifice his country. While his rivals schemed, Congress delivered the burning insult. In February 1777, Congress appointed 5 new major generals. All 5 were junior in rank to Arnold. He had been passed over. Arnold was apoplectic. He had every intention of resigning from military service following these outrages. He was only stopped by the personal intervention of General Washington, who pleaded with Arnold to stay, valuing him as his fighting general. The British invasion, which Arnold had delayed in 1776, resumed in 1777. General John Burgoyne marched south from Canada, and the American army, under the command of General Horatio Gates, prepared to meet him at Saratoga, New York. Arnold, who had temporarily set aside his resignation, was there. He and Gates, a general Arnold viewed with contempt, feuded bitterly. During the first battle on September 19th, Arnold insisted they must attack and helped lead the fight that inflicted heavy casualties on the British. In the aftermath, Gates, in his official report to Congress, failed to mention Arnold's name. This rivalry boiled over. Gates relieved Arnold of his command and ordered him to remain in his quarters. On October 7th, at the decisive second battle, Arnold, hearing the din of the combat, defied those orders. He galloped onto the field, rode out in front of the American troops, and rallied them for a charge against a key British position, the Bremen redoubt. He led the assault that broke the British line and won the battle. In the final volley of this, his greatest triumph, his horse was shot and fell, crushing his leg. At the same instant, a bullet struck him in the same leg that had been wounded at Quebec. He was carried from the field. The Battle of Saratoga was the turning point of the Revolutionary War, the victory that would convince France to enter the war. But its architect, Benedict Arnold, was now crippled for life. And the man who had tried to keep him from the field, Horatio Gates, was hailed as the hero of Saratoga. As Arnold lay for months in an Albany hospital, he had nothing to do but think how much suffering he was going through after having been passed over for higher rank. The physical wound and the psychological insult had become one. Unable to serve in the field, the wounded hero was given a new command, one that would place him in a world of financial temptation and divided loyalties. His body broken, Benedict Arnold's days as a fighting general were over. In June 1778, after the British evacuated Philadelphia, George Washington appointed his wounded hero to the post of military governor of the city. Arnold, who was in too much pain to ride a horse, took up his new command. He immediately began to live extravagantly, moving into the Penn Mansion, the finest home in the city, and holding expensive gatherings. He was desperate to re-establish his fortune, which he had largely spent in service of the war, and he entered into a variety of business deals that earned him a reputation for questionable practices. His lifestyle was also driven by his personal life. He sought to impress the wealthy Shippen family, prominent residents of Philadelphia with known Loyalist sentiments. In 1779, he married their 18-year-old daughter, Peggy Shippen. This union drove him deep into debt, and, crucially, it gave him access. Peggy had contacts with British officers, including the charismatic head of British intelligence, Major John André. Arnold's lavish lifestyle and questionable business deals soon made him powerful enemies, most notably Joseph Reed, the president of Pennsylvania's Supreme Executive Council. Reed and the council trumped up 8 charges of misconduct against Arnold, accusing him of abusing his power. Arnold demanded a court-martial to clear his name. The trial was delayed for months. Finally, on January 26, 1780, the verdict came in. Arnold was cleared of all serious charges. However, the court found him guilty on 2 minor charges: imprudent and improper use of state wagons to protect his personal property and allowing a Loyalist-owned ship to leave port. The sentence was not imprisonment or dismissal. It was a formal reprimand to be delivered by his commander-in-chief, George Washington. This was the final breaking humiliation. to be publicly reprimanded by Washington, the man he most admired, for such petty offenses, after he had twice bled for the cause, was an insult his pride could not endure. He had already begun communicating with the British in May 1779. This verdict cemented his resolve. His treason now began in earnest. Using Peggy's connections, he opened a secret correspondence with Major Andre. He offered the British a prize that would cripple the American cause. He schemed to get command of Fortress West Point, the linchpin of American defenses on the Hudson River. He told Washington his wounded leg made him unfit for field duty and begged him for the desk-bound West Point position. Washington, wanting to give his hero a soft assignment to recover his health and honor, agreed. Once in command, Arnold offered to surrender the fort to Sir Henry Clinton. His price, $20,000. He immediately began to systematically weaken the fort's defenses, scattering his troops on trivial details and refusing to order necessary repairs. The plot required one final, face-to-face meeting. On September 21, 1780, Major Andre was rowed ashore from the British warship HMS Vulture. He and Arnold met in the darkness. But the plan went wrong. American gunfire forced the Vulture to move downriver. Andre was trapped behind enemy lines. He was forced to travel back to New York by land, wearing civilian clothes and carrying a pass from Arnold. On September 23, near Tarrytown, he was stopped by 3 American militiamen, John Paulding, David Williams, and Isaac Van Wart. They searched him. Hidden in his boot, they found the papers, maps of West Point and a summary of its defenses, all in Benedict Arnold's handwriting. On the morning of September 25, 1780, General Washington was riding toward West Point. He planned to have breakfast with General Arnold. Washington sent 2 of his aides, Captain Samuel Shaw and Major James McHenry, ahead to Arnold's headquarters at the Robinson House to tell her Peggy not to wait for me. Arnold sat down to breakfast with the 2 aides. As they were eating, a courier arrived and handed Arnold a letter. It was from the American officer who had captured Andre, informing Arnold that the spy was in custody. Arnold read the message. The shock on Arnold's face was palpable. He quietly excused himself from the table, telling the aides he had to go across the river to prepare the fort for Washington's visit. He went upstairs, told Peggy their scheme was exposed, then raced downstairs past the startled aides. He galloped down to the river, jumped into his personal barge, and ordered his oarsmen to row downriver with all their might, promising them a significant reward for their speed. He fled to the safety of the HMS Vulture. Just moments later, General Washington arrived at the house for breakfast, only to find a panicked household and the unfolding evidence of the greatest betrayal in American history. Arnold had escaped, but hundreds of miles to the south, the men who had marched into the snow-covered mountains were also closing in on their own target. We returned to the Carolina backcountry, to the 1,000 frontiersmen who had marched out of Sycamore Shoals. They emerged from the snow-covered mountains, starving but determined. They soon joined with other Patriot militia units, their numbers swelling. They learned that 2 of their own men, suspected loyalists, had deserted to warn Major Ferguson. The hunt was now a race. The militia leaders knew they had to catch Ferguson before he could retreat to the safety of Cornwallis's main army. They chose their 900 best men and horses for a final, desperate pursuit, an all-night ride through a cold, driving rain that never stopped. Ferguson, now aware of the hornet's nest he had provoked, was retreating, but he misjudged the speed and fury of his pursuers. He chose to make his stand on Kings Mountain, South Carolina, a small 60-foot rocky hill, believing it to be an unassailable position. On October 7, 1780, the 900 Patriots arrived. They did not plan a traditional assault. They simply surrounded the hill. The fierce firefight that followed was a perfect, brutal clash of 2 different worlds. Ferguson's loyalists, trained in the British style, fought from close-order ranks. They fired in volleys and launched bayonet charges down the hill. Their weapon was the smoothbore musket, inaccurate at a distance but fast to load. The Overmountain Men fought frontier style. They used the woods and took cover behind trees and rocks. Their weapon was the American long rifle, a hunting tool that was slow to load but very accurate at 200 or 300 yards. When the Loyalists charged with bayonets, the frontiersmen simply faded back into the trees, let the charge pass, and then, from all sides, selected a definite human target for every ball fired. The Loyalists were trapped on the exposed hilltop. One survivor recalled that the frontiersmen, with their long matted hair and whooping calls, looked like devils from the infernal regions. The Loyalist perimeter shrank with every volley. Major Patrick Ferguson, mounted on his horse and blowing his silver whistle, became an ideal target. He was hit multiple times by the expert rifleman. His body was left hanging from his horse as the animal fled down the hill. With their commander gone, the remaining Loyalists surrendered. The battle had lasted just over an hour. The victory was absolute. Ferguson's entire force of over 1,000 men was killed, wounded, or captured. The Overmountain Men lost only 28 killed and 62 wounded. This stinging defeat was the first major Patriot victory in the South. It shattered Ferguson's Loyalist army and destroyed Cornwallis's western flank. The British general was forced to halt his invasion of North Carolina and retreat southward. The battle, won by a volunteer army of crude, spirited, hardy, determined volunteers, changed the entire momentum of the war. Thomas Jefferson called it the turn of the tide of success.